Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to The View from the Midwest. It's time for another post-match edition for St. Louis FC, and unfortunately, today could not be the big day that we had all hoped in the area, as St. Louis FC could not pull off the victory over the Charlotte Independents, which would have completed a pretty good sports day overall, as the St. Louis Blues, the hockey team here in the area, was able to knock off the Minnesota Wild, one of the best teams in the Central Division, and carry on to the second round of the playoffs. But this is a post-game show for soccer, so let's stick to that. Really just the overall feelings of the game was St. Louis FC really just didn't have it from the very beginning, and it's hard to tell why. Obviously, they come out with a decent amount of energy. It was a good start to the game. They came out, they took things to Charlotte from the get-go and got the first goal of the game as well, forcing a bit of a mistake there at the back. Angulo ended up picking up the goal for St. Louis, and it ended up being a very good start to the game, with St. Louis getting that early score. But for whatever reason, after that, it just wasn't going to turn out very well for St. Louis, as that goal came within the first 3 minutes of the game. So St. Louis looked like they were going to run off and take things out. But unfortunately for them, it just wasn't really necessarily to be, as Charlotte Independents came back, got the tying goal later in that half, and then again another goal in the second half to gave you that final score line as it was, which was 2-1. And the disappointing thing, though, was St. Louis FC had the bulk of the game in their control. And you could tell that Charlotte was doing their best to try to stop St. Louis FC from doing what they wanted to do. Now, obviously, that's going to be the game plan of any team going into any game, is you want to take your opponent out of their rhythm, out of what they want to do, out of what they do best. But you could tell, really, that Charlotte's plan was to put numbers behind the ball, keep St. Louis FC from finding that open space, and really kind of throw them off their game. And to their credit, they really did a very good job of that, because St. Louis FC dominated possession, but it was a lot of possession that led to nothing. There was a lot of bogged up play for St. Louis FC in the midfield. They had a few good attacks going forward, which is always good to see, because this team has struggled in the attack in the past. And granted, this is a completely different side, really, in terms of starters. Really, A.J. Cochran is the only player that's left over from last season. But you still have that kind of St. Louis thing, that mojo that kind of goes around, where no matter how many players you bring in year to year, regardless of the sport, it seems like trends tend to follow the club, no matter who it is, whether it's the Cardinals, Blues, the soccer teams, what have you. St. Louis FC ended up with 68.3% of the possession. Now, you keep your opponent right around 30% of the ball, a little bit over, but right around 30%, you should be picking up a victory. And it's actually kind of ridiculous that St. Louis FC didn't get 3 points out of this game, which is not to say that Charlotte didn't deserve to get the result that they did. But if not for a couple defensive miscues, Charlotte really should not have even been in this contest. They played well enough to get the 3 points once they got those 2 goals. But how they got the goals is really kind of the disappointing thing, because it was just St. Louis FC was a little bit loose at the back. There seemed to be a couple chances where I don't even know how to describe it. It was just miscommunication, a lack of cohesiveness necessarily, but the one play in the second half that led to the goal, it was just kind of 2 defenders coming towards the ball. The one tried to slide tackle it away. It ended up going off the person that ended up having the goal, which was Martinez. He ended up having both goals for Charlotte, but I just would have liked to have seen the defenders keep running with the play, because it's basically a 1-on-2. There were other Independence players that were going to join the play, but if you keep following that, Then all of a sudden, I think that maybe even though they don't necessarily have the speed of Martinez, if you're the player without the ball, you still have the edge in terms of getting towards the defensive area because it's always easier to run without the ball than it is with it. So it just ended up being kind of a bad luck play because you see it 9 times out of 10 where these central defenders try to slide tackle these plays from the side, knock the ball away, or at least get it away from the player. And it's successful a lot of the times. And this was just one of those instances where it wasn't successful because it ended up going off the attacker straight into the box. There was nothing that the goalkeeper for St. Louis FC could do. Really, it was a pretty good game overall for Gorick, again, who has yet to have too bad of a performance in and of himself. St. Louis FC, obviously, an incredibly disappointing performance last week against Pittsburgh. And the reason I didn't do a post-game review of that one is because I was at work, so I didn't get to see the game. So I usually try not to do post-match reviews if I haven't actually seen the majority of the contest, or at least a half or so. But this team is by no means out of anything. They're 4-4-2 now. They fall into 4th in the conference, still well within a playoff spot, 4th out of 8. So things are looking good for St. Louis FC, and you can't knock them too much because this team, nothing against the last couple years that they've had, because there were some really great moments in that time. But you can just tell that this is a completely different team. It's run differently. The cardio and the stamina is much better on this team than it has been in the past. There's a different style being played, and it's just much more enjoyable to watch. And I think that that's where the frustration as a fan comes in, because Charlotte comes in, and they were near the bottom of the league. They're still outside the playoff mark looking in, despite the fact that they do have 4 victories on the year, but a lot of losses and draws and what have you have led to them not necessarily getting the most points out of the season that they would have liked. But St. Louis FC, you could just tell that they should have been the better team. They had the better quality in terms of actual technical ability, but Charlotte was allowed to use their tenacity, their energy to great effect in this contest, and for whatever reason, St. Louis FC just seemed to let their couple mistakes kind of get them down. And in the end, that was what really ended up costing them. St. Louis FC going forward is still going to have a lot of great opportunities to try to get this season as they keep on rolling. But they need to really kind of clean up the few things that have really continued to cost them, because ultimately those are the kind of points that are dropped that end up costing you as the season goes along. This was a very winnable game, and going forward, you need to pick up those 3 points anytime you get an opportunity to do so. And St. Louis FC, I think, as the season rolls along, is going to look at this game and kind of see it as a missed opportunity to really kind of put their stamp on this season, especially at home, making Toyota Stadium, Worldwide Technology Soccer Park, however you want to refer to it as really kind of a fortress, and really kind of solidify everything in terms of going forward. Now, all of a sudden, it's a very short week for St. Louis FC. They have a game coming up this Thursday against Orlando City's B team. That's going to be a very interesting contest, because Orlando City actually had been affiliated with Louisville, and that's why Louisville had such a strong team in their very first year in USL, because a lot of the players that had been playing for Orlando when they were in the lower divisions before they went to the MLS all of a sudden got transferred into the Louisville squad. So they had been playing together despite the fact that it hadn't necessarily been in Louisville. But now with Orlando City having a B team, it'll be interesting to see how that kind of comes together for them, and whether St. Louis FC can kind of get things back on the winning side on the road. And then after that, they're going to come back home for a home game in the first weekend of May. So hopefully we'll have a little bit better crowd out there at the soccer park, Toyota Stadium, what have you. Because although the numbers that they gave were pretty good, it was the weather, I think, kept a lot of people away. It was a little bit of a chilly night. There was rain in the forecast that never ended up materializing. But ultimately, people need to start showing back up. It's a great team. I'm really still pumped about the way that this season could go. And it's going to be interesting to see how everything plays out, especially as things start warming up and we get into more rhythm and seeing how this team is going to play. Because right now they're looking good. They just need to clean a few things up. And I think they're going to be all right going ahead. But still a disappointing result overall, given what was potentially at stake and keeping things rolling on home turf. But those are the kind of roles that you have to go with in terms of how a season's going to play out. That'll do it for today's post-match edition against Charlotte Independence. Once again, St. Louis FC falls by the final score of 2-1. They're fourth in the table on the eastern side of the conference. So hopefully they will be able to turn that around come the midweek game. Until the next time, though, I'll see you then.